Okay, it's 10 o'clock by my watch.
This is your moment.
Well, welcome everyone. We'll just start with a karakia. Kia tau, manakitanga, ateneo naro, kia runga, ki tēnā o tātou, kia mahia, te huia, makiiki, kia toi te kupa, toi te mana, toi te araha, toi te reo Māori, kia tūturu, ka whakamoa, ki tēnā,
May
the strength and life force of our ancestors be with each and every one of us, freeing our path from obstruction, so that our words, spiritual power, love and language are upheld, permanently fixed, established and understood, forward together. Thank you. Welcome everyone to the council meeting on the 2nd of August. Just a standard health and safety to start off with. For those that aren't familiar, the toilets are just out that door there on your right. Should there be an evacuation for any reason, please exit down the stairwell to the assembly point in Bay Street and both use the lift. If there's an earthquake, drop cover and hold. And if we could please just turn our phones onto silent mode. And also just a reminder that these proceedings are being recorded for the purpose of live video, both live streaming and downloading. So by remaining in this meeting, the proceedings are being filmed for viewing later. Right, so we'll kick off with the apologies. I've got one for Councillor Wilson, who's on a leave of absence, and Councillor Ruddenflaw is going to be late, expecting to be here about 11:30. And I believe Councillor Menzies has to duck out at about 11:30.
11:20.
I'll be away by 2:45. Oh, it's okay.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
Is there any further apologies? Someone like to move those be accepted? Councillor Spraggan, Councillor Keast, all in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Any further leave of absence from what we've already had recorded?
I have just next week for a few days from the weekend, probably about Thursday, and also from the 18th to the 29th of August.
No further
Could be zooming in.
No further leave of absence?
Potentially I'll be zooming in.
Someone like to move? Councillor Beaupre, seconder, Councillor Fraser, all in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Do we have any conflicts with colleagues for the meeting today? There being none, we don't have any extraordinary or urgent items, I don't think. So we'll move on to the confirmation of the council minutes from the 5th of July on page 5. We're going to move on to those correct. Councillor Beaupre, Councillor Keast, all in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. We don't have any public participation that I'm aware of. So that takes us to our first report, which is the community update from Active Southland on page 19. So I'll welcome the team from Active Southland up to the table.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for this invitation. Jenna and I were here earlier in the year talking about a holiday program, and we really value this opportunity to come back and talk more broadly about Active Southland. Just an acknowledgement that we are talking about our mahi today, but obviously it's a really close partnership with your council staff, so Open Spaces, the community partnership team. We don't do this alone, so I appreciate that. My name's Jess Domigan and I'm the General Manager.
Ko Jenna Shepherd Tuka Ingoa. I'm the Southland District Regional Activator that feeds into the SDC Open Spaces strategy.
And tēnā koutou katoa, Vanessa Huey-Pole, Chief Executive of Active Southland. So we'll just crank straight into it, and we have a couple of wee slides there just for visual aids, and my role is just to share this morning a little bit about the journey of Active Southland, just to establish some commonalities about where we've come from and where we're headed. So it was actually established in August 1990 as the Southland Sports Foundation, and not long after that, it was about sort of 4 years later, the trust deed was amended and then it was changed at that point to Sports Southland. from which most of you may be familiar with the organisation of Sport Southland, and it has been that way up until 2021. So that's our roots. Our roots have been, were established in that supporting the sports sector. But as we evolved over the years, that journey expanded, and where we got to was this huge continuum between sport and health, everything from active recreation, play and wellbeing. And that's basically because of the needs of the community and the role that physical activity plays, not just in sport outcomes, but actually in terms of wellbeing outcomes and community connectedness. So over the years, I think it's fair to say that the organisation has really honed in and focused on innovation. And a couple of examples just to bring this to life have really focused in on the role that we've played nationally as well. So Healthy Active Learning, as the team will talk about a little bit later today, actually had its starts in Invercargill. We prototyped it down here with our partnerships with local schools. And actually the learnings were rolled out across the country. So Healthy Active Learning has become a model for how we interact and we support our school system across the country. So it's pretty cool to know that somewhere down in the deep south we've had a role to play in terms of the learnings and shaping that across the country. Another great example of innovation of the organisation is, as you're aware, is Swim Safe Southland. And that initiative has been ongoing over a number of years. And we saw the gaps in terms of water safety and giving young people an opportunity to learn about what it means to keep each other safe, keep oneself safe in the water. And that's actually won a couple of national awards through water safety. So the team are really committed to not just ticking boxes, but actually thinking about and understanding the needs of our community and how we might play a role in supporting that through resourcing and capability build. And over the years, we have developed and changed and grown with that. And so the brand change from Sport Southland to Active Southland in 2021 was a natural reflection of that change. So sport was only one component, a very important component, but only one component of the work that we do. So we believe Active Southland is a better representation of the work that we do in and across our schools, in and across our communities, be it rural or urban, and obviously an extension of that commitment to the broader sense of wellbeing. So just to sum up, I think our purpose really does reflect that, and that's about enhancing individual and community wellbeing. That's what we're here for. We use the vehicle of physical activity to interact and connect with our fellow Southlanders. So I think that's probably me. Is that next slide me or no? Yeah, so the last slide that I'll speak to is just basically a reflection of that concept around te whare tapu whā, which is physical wellbeing. So we use that as our core vehicle to connect and interact with Southlanders, but that reflects in so many different ways, whether it be getting to and from work or school, fulfilling a personal aspiration, or connecting with the outdoors. So everything in between that is how we connect with our community. So I'll pass over now to Jess.
Kia ora. What we'd like to do now is just talk through the link between some of the work that we're doing and the value proposition that we believe Play Active Rec and Sport has towards your outcomes for the full wellbeing. We believe it's a cost-effective investment towards your local government wellbeing outcomes, and we'll talk to some of these examples of this happening already. These are not new to you, I'm sure, but we just wanted to touch on the value proposition that we believe we can offer. So social wellbeing, the Play Active Rec and Sport can help build, strengthen social networks, bringing communities together and increasing a sense of belonging. It helps to improve pride and reducing antisocial behaviours in communities. Alongside that, and often unable to kind of completely split them out separately, is the cultural wellbeing aspect. So strengthen cultural ties from participation in Play Active Rec and Sport, and increase wellbeing from participating in culturally relevant physical activity. So some examples of this that we're already working together on Yeah, all good. As you know, is your holiday program in which we work really closely to bring to your communities an opportunity to be socially connected and to provide a connection to community in their location of where they live. Another example is Vanessa touched on our Healthy Active Learning initiative. We're in every school in the Southland District region, and this is a joint initiative between Sport New Zealand, the Ministry of Education and Te Whatu Ora that seeks to improve the wellbeing of children and young people. Specifically, our workforce work alongside teachers, principals and boards to increase confidence in understanding the health and PE curriculum and understanding how that can be interwove to other areas of curriculum and school life. And of course, the connection from school, neighbourhood and community is a vital part of this as well. Another part of the connection that we see through your open spaces strategy in action. On the left, you'll see your outcomes for the open spaces strategy, and on the right, you'll see our action, which is facilitated through Jenna. Sorry, it's very small writing. But another example of providing opportunities for people to be active in their own community, to provide insights, to learn about the needs, and to provide them back to you for decision making. I'll just hand over to Jenna to talk about a specific part of the cultural wellbeing that we've seen noted.
Yeah, so obviously, as you're aware, the portable pump track is currently in Bluff and it's heading to nightcaps in 8-ish so weeks. So we have been, well, I've been working with the Ohai Marae that has, in the last 3 to 4 months, getting back off the ground for community and becoming a valuable tool with kapa haka. And we've spoken to the chair about the food and being a part of the opening of the track when it comes to nightcaps. So they're going to lay down a hangi for community and the kapa haka are going to do a performance, which is really exciting for the community that that's back up and running and having a marae out in Western Southland, which is really cool to support.
Thank you. Just to touch on a few elements of where we believe economic wellbeing can be directly impacted through sport and activity. One being productivity gains as a result of physical activity, and the other being the savings for communities as a result of volunteer workforce. So just to touch on some of the work, whoops, I did mine, but not that one, sorry. We administer a fund on behalf of Sport New Zealand called the Te Manawa Active Aotearoa Fund. What this looks like for your communities is $115,000 granted into 13 organisations across the district. Of note, 4 of the more kind of probably ones that you've been brought to your level is the Turner Portable Pump Track, the Mossburn Indoor Sports Facility, Fiordland Climbing Club, and a number of projects out of Aparima College. Another element that we see as part of our work is supporting volunteers. You see there that the Active New Zealand estimates around 1,230,000 adults volunteered at least once in the previous 12 months for sport, exercise and recreation activity. That's a huge number of people, and knowing our communities, a lot of them are involved in their local clubs in various ways. We were able to partner with your partnerships team, community partnerships, to lead to bring the New Zealand Amateur Sports Association down, primarily to look at this issue we have with the changes to the Incorporated Societies Act. It's a massive issue for our clubs and societies, specifically in the sports sector, and we are really concerned about what these changes mean. Therefore, we're putting into place some good supports and understanding for our communities. There's also been a creation of a Southland Community Pool Network, which is trying to support volunteers to work in a way where they can share knowledge, share expertise and support each other in maintaining those. This particular slide talks to the economic wellbeing of lost productivity or increasing productivity. Our Toko Oranga service, we have one staff member based in Te Anau, and she works alongside the general practice to be able to see patients new and free to them, supporting patients with improving their physical and mental wellbeing. So we believe that through those appointments and through the connection of having a staff member up into a GP practice, we will see better outcomes and productivity for that area. Lastly, this is probably a bigger one, the environmental wellbeing. provision of green spaces, this is nothing new to you, I'm sure, but play, sport and active rec and infrastructure for active transportation can support the achievement of environmental and community wellbeing outcomes. I'll just touch on a couple that we are part of currently. Obviously, you're aware of active transport. Reduction of emissions is a huge priority across the country, and also for us. And obviously, active transport, getting more people on bikes, scooters where possible, is a way to reduce those emissions. The portable pump track helping to build skills and confidence, and also to understand community need and want for infrastructure or facilities or spaces to be active. Just to touch on the school transport plans, one in Te Anau and one in Winton for your area, and that's working with the children to understand why or why not they might not feel safe to commute to school via active transport, and that's been a really positive project. The photo here is of our active transport innovator Laura Thompson working with Winton School to create their video that they're going to share with their community about what they need from the parents, from the school and from the community to be safe and to using scooters and biking to school. Spaces and places strategy, I'm thinking this is probably quite familiar to you, but advocates for an evidence-based approach to support decision-making for what we need. The realities that we see in Southland are there are a lot of single-use facilities. Many of them are reaching end of life. Recreation trends are changing, what people want is changing. Councils and funders have limited resources, and there is a need for more flexible and multi-use facilities. Alongside that is a willingness and a need from our communities to work closer together. There's a concept of hubbing, not around facilities necessarily, but around the services they provide. And again, the Open Spaces project comes into this place as well. I rushed through that. Sorry. Where are we going?
Can you show the rest of that slide? Oh, it's got nothing on it.
Nothing.
Excellent, excellent. I think the key thing that I want to summarise here is that for us is about reducing down the amount of work that we're doing, so we can really focus on going deeper into communities and walking alongside. So that we all know change is difficult and change takes time, and we can't rush that change because we need communities to come with us on that journey. So in order for us to do that, we really need to think about where do we best put our resources, and what does that look like in terms of walking alongside communities for change. So our strategic direction is focused in primarily 4 key areas. One part of that is about what support can we provide to those regional leaders in our community who hold resources and have the ability to make decisions that affect communities at a large scale. So how can we support you on that journey as well as thinking about those regional funders that walk in the same space. And we're really committed to providing the right level of data that can inform your decision making, as well as providing community voice and insights alongside your community partnerships team. Through prototyping and activations, we can support the concepts and ideas that community want to bring to life. The second area is our focus on young people. They are our next generation, they are our current generation, and how do we understand their aspirations and their desires for moving forward? So giving effect and giving voice and giving opportunities for them to have their agency to make decisions in areas that affect them directly. So young people, whether that be rangatahi or tamariki at any age, we want to provide the right level in those systems that they operate in to cause an effect for long-term change. And the third area is around communities. So thinking about those communities who are deeply affected in terms of equitable outcomes, in terms of potentially isolation, and I guess the intelligence and the data that supports that, and where we best put our resources, again, for those aspirational outcomes. The last one's about us, because we can't do this work unless we're walking the talk. So we're thinking about things like understanding our carbon footprint, about understanding our ability to understand the work that needs to be done and having the right systems in place. So part of that involves understanding things like systems change. What are those parts of the systems that we can step into and reach into and have a material impact on? So those are the 4 sort of high-level areas, and we're really keen to walk alongside Southland District Council through that journey. And we hope today that today's just given you somewhat of an understanding about where we've come from, the things that have been top of mind in our world, and what we hope the future looks like in terms of the use of our resources. So I'll wrap it up there and hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, it was real clear to me the collaborative approach that you take to everything, and being involved with that opening of that turn to pump track a couple of weekends ago. It was just fantastic to see the collaboration and the success of that, and also the fact that it's going out into our smaller communities as well. It's not just all focused in the big city and everything, and it's fantastic, and the results I think will speak for themselves in our community. Have we got any questions from?
Through you, Your Worship. Congratulations, well done on all the work that you've done and you continue to do. We had a meeting last night and we had a meeting this morning which sort of touched on some of the elements that you're talking about, with health and being active within the communities. I've just got a question for you under the, the active transport side of things, under that umbrella, and getting people to activity-based places based on some of our challenge around our geography in Southland, based on some of the challenges around isolation and inequality, but also harnessing technology and innovation that you mentioned earlier. Do you have any initiatives around using technology, say in the form of like a rural Uber or sort of a ride-sharing type setup? So as an example, you could go onto an app and you could say, well, I'm in this particular location and I want to get here. You could have, people who are sign up and are certified to go through a process to make sure that they're fit and proper people to be able to offer that service. And therefore, then you could log and register and then sort of be picked up or dropped off accordingly. Is that the sort of thing that you're open to in terms of that technology?
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I think the idea that you've talked about is really innovative, and it's the type of things that if we provided the space for communities to develop solutions themselves, these would be the types of things that we'd hope would come out of that. Part of our role is trying to think as much outside the square as we can and thinking about the systems that support, because we can roll up our sleeves and run an activity, but that's not necessarily going to be the long-term change. So I really support the things that you're saying, and I suppose it's just a matter of reconnecting back with communities to understand the aspiration to fulfil that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Byers?
Thank you very much. It was very good, interesting to hear of the work that you're doing. You talked about community connectedness and well-being, and in particular regards to the young people. And I get some feedback from teachers concerned about the level of technology that the children are using on a daily basis, and the negative effect that technology is having on their ability to learn. Is that anything that you're bringing into your understanding as far as children's well-being? And
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Definitely, it's an issue that we're all faced with, but it's about turning around and harnessing what are they doing on those devices, and is there any way that we can understand what their needs are for play, active, rec and sport? Are we meeting that need? I think that's where we focus our energy around that healthy, active learning in primary school at the moment. Our rangatahi team do work into the high school, but I think if we are true to understanding and wanting to hear from rangatahi perspective and their voice, they will tell us what we're doing wrong in terms of play, active, rec and sport, and what the offerings need to look like to be a choice for them between technology and sport. I think sport traditionally, the traditions of sport, although have so much value for all of us, rangatahi are looking for something different, a different offering, and therefore if we can listen to them and understand what that need is, hopefully will be another option to the technology. I don't think it'll ever go away. I think we need to harness it, but also provide that opportunity of what they actually want.
And one of the outcomes underpinning this work that we do is it talks about enabling time, permission for young people to play. And so when we think about the system that surrounds that, we think about schools, parents, teachers, play opportunities, physical infrastructure. And so we're trying to have a connection in each of those spaces, really, so that the system surrounding the young person all leads towards giving them time and permission to play. Just, I suppose, how we grew up, right? All the who-dicky-dahs of it all. Yeah.
Councillor Baker-Wright?
Thank you. Through your worship, I was wondering if you could have a look at the school transport plans you say are completed, because they're probably going to, I'm guessing, feeding into our work at some stage.
Potentially, yes. Yeah, we can share those back with you. No problem. Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Green?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and a lead-on question. So, what's the next steps for those plans? What's the
For the school transport.
yeah? What's the next steps in terms of impact and outcome?
An evaluation of them. I think they've just, my understanding through the active transport innovator is that those have landed in the schools, the plans are in place, the evaluation is the next step. So it's just about they're very new. So yeah, I can provide those back and then we can have a conversation.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question around the transport safety. Does that include situations where children walking to school may feel intimidated by other children also walking?
As part of the active transport and the healthy active learning, because both are in that school, for example, they'll work on alongside the teachers in the schools around how to understand and navigate those issues for children. Whether they be behavioural or supportive walking buses and things like that with parents. Yeah, it's around providing a safe place for them to get to school, walking, scootering or biking, but putting that infrastructure and system around it to make it sustainable as well.
And enabling them to tell an adult.
Yes, yeah.
The other question I had was just around the Tunatuna, the track, which is amazing. So it's the way to Nightcaps next. Can you just remind us of where it's travelling to after that, what communities?
So after heading to Nightcaps, it's planned to go to Wyndham.
Yep.
So that'll be where it heads off to next.
Okay. And how long is it with us for?
We might have
Yeah,
who can answer it.
Through your worship. So pre the Wyndham Primary School putting in the permanent pump track, that was based on the funding, how we worked as a collaborative unit to get the funding over the line. Socioeconomic was quite high up there, and so Wyndham in the Waihopo Toitoi area was selected. Since then I've had a just very high level discussion with the board chair to say we need to revisit that conversation, not saying that it's fixed to be there, but it will be going to Waihopo Toitoi as the fourth location after Nightcaps, because of course it's a partnership that included ICC in the end as well. So it will come back to South City, Newfield, and then it will be back in our district in Waihopo Toitoi, and Rakiura is still up in the air too. So we secured 3 of the first 5 sites for Southland District, and then in the second year is when we're bringing in obviously more sites across them all. So the Waihopo Toitoi exact landing location is still up in the air for that reason, because the school's plans kind of changed as this project, because it's been about 2 years kind of in.
No, that's great, thanks. And I'm just thinking of communities where it may seem that children have that access to physical activity, but in fact wait lists are so long for children to get involved in some of those physical activities where they've got a tutor. This offers just another alternative, and for parents to be able to take them along to what is an activity that really engages young people.
And it's a safe option as well, and a safe location. They can they're away from the roads, and it enables them to actually learn to ride their bike and enjoy their bike.
Yes, I was somewhat pleased down at Bluff. It was under shelter, so I guess the time of year in which it's in which venue, that may be a consideration. But that was excellent at Bluff. Thank you.
I'll just add something very quickly, just to say that we've fronted on some areas today, but just to make it really clear that we are we are one part of many, and that we acknowledge the teams standing behind us as well. The community partnerships team as being a fundamental part of that, and many of the things that we've spoken about today have been a direct result of working alongside. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there as well. Yeah, thank the team very much.
Yeah, and also in the mahi that I do under the Open Spaces strategy, I bring SDC along on that journey as well. So it's not just me as Active Southland, it's also working and promoting the SDC support that we get into the work that we're doing and into our communities.
Fantastic. Councillor Byers?
Oh, just a quick one, thanks, Your Worship. You talked about wellbeing for communities and helping the leaders or different leaders with their understanding of what contributes to the wellbeing for the children. And I'm wondering, the space, we have a lot of mown grass, and there's a lot of research indicating that plants other than mown grass are actually good for people. Forests being one example, but is that anything that's coming into your work? Encouraging move away from
Sorry.
Yeah, and the schools, they use a lot of the forest area, or do take the kids out of school and they go and they do all their nature walk and nature studies and things like that. But also with the work I do in the open spaces, which is all the green space, there's planting projects that we've kind of supported people on to get their areas back to their natural. But also, the green space, how do we activate that, supporting the communities on what they'd like to see, and planting is one of those.
Cool. Thank you very much. Just quickly, Councillor.
Sorry, just last question through Your Worship. We obviously in this country and around this table, from time to time, we talk about legislation around the sale of and supply of goods which could be deemed to be harmful to communities. Cigarettes, alcohol, vaping, so on and so forth, and yet we see them actively being advertised. Is there an appetite for Southland to lead the way in terms of taking an advertising opportunity and through us being able to say, well, if you open a vape store, as an example, that there needs to be some form of advertising from, say, Active Southland to be able to say, hey, well, it's important that we're showing people that it's really important that we lead active lives, that we lead healthy lives. I mean, that could go from, we deal with liquor licensing as an example, and we, that could extend through to food outlets as well. It's all linked, right?
Yeah.
Is that something, would you have an appetite, so to speak, for that?
Yeah, it's a complex space, isn't it? And when you start pulling strings, it sort of unravels in different areas as well. In terms of the sports sector itself, there is a heavy reliance on, things like gaming trusts and licensing trusts and whatnot. And we are aware of their wider benefit, but also quite aware of the stigma that goes along with that and some of the challenges. So we do talk about it a lot, and in particular our work through Healthy Families, which is primarily in Invercargill. We have worked alongside the likes of smoke-free collective networks and alcohol agencies, just about to sort of launch have just launched a particular initiative which outlines the questions we might ask ourselves to keep ourselves safe when we are out drinking and what have you. So there are things that we're actively doing in that space, but we're always keen to understand how we might use the vehicle of physical activity to support and enhance the wellbeing in other areas, because we believe it is a really powerful tool that we can use to affect change in a whole lot of other areas, such as the ones that you've described. I think it's probably just fleshing out a little bit more about what that looks like on the ground.
Cool. Thank you very much. And I'll move from the chair that we acknowledge your attendance, and that was a great presentation. And, yeah, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Menzies. All in favour? Aye. Yeah, that's carried. Thank you very much once again. So moving right along to 7.2, which is the Stewart Island Rakiota Visitor Levy Allocation 2023 unbudgeted expenditure request on page 23 of your agenda. Welcome, Catherine Cowie.
Your Worship and councillors. So yes, the purpose of this report is to seek approval for unbudgeted expenditure from the Stewart Island Rakiora Visitor Levy Subcommittee of $51,591. So the committee approved allocation of $150,000 for one project. There was $146,938 budgeted to spend, and of that amount, $48,529 was already committed from a multi-year grant the previous year. So that's where that figure comes from. Happy to answer any questions.
I'll just jump over to Councillor Keast as the chair of the committee. Did you have any comment you wanted to make?
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, basically this is just to form is around what we forecast put in the budget to spend, and so it's not, the money is actually still as part of the there and available as allocation, so it's really just formalising. I'll say that in the report. Just one of those things. We look forward to what we're going to spend and what we do end up spending of the allocation. But it's good to have it used because these days of high inflation, well, it disappears faster than you can spend it, really. And
Thank you, Your Worship. It does disappear fast, and I was of the understanding that the duty there is not necessarily going to go ahead, that there are other options. So I'm wondering if this needs to be allocated to a duty when it's not necessarily...
Well, I'd imagine that if it doesn't go ahead, then the funding will be returned to the full...
Do you want me to answer that one?
You can.
Just answering on behalf of Simon, who couldn't be here today. The applications to the Tourism Infrastructure Fund and the Stewart Island Visitor Levy have continued to be processed because they were put in before the current situation occurred about the putting on hold things. They need to continue through the process because Council hasn't had the chance to make the final decision about what it's going to do about the war. And as His Worship said, the money will be returned if it's not used as part of the project.
Are there any further questions?
Through you, Worship. I don't know if you're aware or not, but there was some information that came through from Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment around the International Visitor Levy. And I see that Stewart Island didn't feature the round of funding. Do you have any indication as to why that hasn't been the case?
Through you, Your Worship, the Stewart Island Visitor Levy is quite separate from the International Visitor Levy, and the Stewart Island Levy is managed by us, so I wouldn't have seen a linkage between the two.
Well, Milford Opportunities received, I believe, $3 million as part of that International Visitor Levy.
Because, yes, through you, Your Worship, it did, because of its link, because it's a government project. There's been no application to the International Visitor Levy for the Island Wharf or anything like that, although perhaps that might be a funding area that we may look at if the project continues.
It's certainly something I think we should look at.
I believe DOC get a good percentage of that levy as well, so that may help with this item. You have a question, Councillor? No. If there's no further questions, I'll look at the recommendation there on page 23 that we received the report and approve the recommendation of the Stewart Island Rakiora Visitor Levy Subcommittee for unbudgeted expenditure for the amount of $51,591 and the fund allocations to be funded from the Visitor Levy Reserve. Do we have someone in a position to move that? Councillor Spraggan. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Duffy. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anybody against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, that takes us to Item 7.3, the amendment to rates, resolution and fees charges 23-24. Shelley up to the table.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. Through you, Your Worship, this report requests that Council approve corrections to the fees and charges from the list that was included in the annual plan and amendments to the rates instalment and the penalty dates. These reports came up to Council on the 21st of July 2023 and were approved. And since then we've found these, and I'm bringing this report up to you to highlight this. Basically, an error occurred during the transfer of the information in the annual plan document, which resulted in some environmental Southland fees being missed or incorrect with sense with the amounts. They're listed below on the schedule. Basically, Finance is now going to start a project to make sure this doesn't happen again between the information coming from the managers to us and the reiterations and the way it comes through to try and ensure this doesn't happen again. And the second amendment relates to the rates resolution report I brought through. The fourth instalment date had the 24th of May 24, but the last working Friday is actually the 31st next year, not the 24th as it was this year. We've standardly always done the last working Friday of every quarter that it's due, and I'd like to change that to be consistent again with ICC's dates as well, just to get that one consistent approach for the ratepayers, and it's also an extra week. So I would like to make those amendments rather than leave them as what they were. Basically, I can only apologise and say we're working to try and mitigate happening this again. Yeah. Any questions?
Just a question for me, and where you got 27th of July, is that 27th of June or 27th of July?
On what, sorry?
On recommendation A, for the amendment to the resolution and fees. Is that
Today's date should be the 2nd of August.
Okay, cool.
Just the report today. So yeah, if we can amend that, please.
Oh, sorry, okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's right. Do we have any other questions from the board? Councillor Duff?
I think it's all quite logical, and I'd be happy to move the recommendation.
Cool. So that's moving right through from A to H. I won't bore you and read them all out. I assume everyone read them and are comfortable. Do we have someone in position second? Councillor Fraser. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.
Clarify whether we need to approve the unbudgeted expenditure for in relation to the levy. Do we also need to approve the funding application, which is on a separate?
I think that goes through the committee, doesn't it?
It's just it's an option one here. We approve the funding application, so we don't need to do that. In relation to
That wasn't in the actual recommendation. Was it?
no, it's the second paper. Is it not the copies? I don't know, I'm just asking the question because it's in our papers.
We'll just take a quick adjournment and have a look at that.
We'll come back to it after.
Yeah, we'll come back to that
Lunch.
later. Actually, yeah, we'll revisit that one after lunch. Thanks. Okay, so just going to move right along to the financial report, 7.4 for the period ended 30th of June 23 on page 43.
Start off with a happy birthday to Bree.
Oh, happy birthday.
We have a good positive there. Thank you.
No pay increase.
That's right. Good morning, Your Worship, councillors. So today I'll present the financial report for the year ended 30 June 2022, 2023 should I say, wrong year. So I would like to just want to note that this report is based on the draft June results prior to our year-end processes being undertaken. So year-end adjustments to be processed still after this report include internal interest, income advance, revaluations and the associated depreciation adjustment. So the final report, as in the annual report, will be available later in 2023. Along with the report, we will complete a comparison of the actual results compared to projection. That'll be brought back to you. So the operating income for the 12-month period as of soft close is 7.8 million, or 7% below projection, with our operating expenditure being 10.6 or 8% below projection, and our capital expenditure being 18.7 million or 43% lower than projection for the period to date. I will just take any questions you might have on that report.
Thank you, and there's quite a few explanations in there in those various lines, but does anyone have any questions for Brady? Councillor Brady?
Through you, Worship, I had one query. It was on page 59, and it was just querying the term deposit link. The term deposit with the ANZ, I just wondered if that date was correct. It said maturity was the 19th of July 23, but it was only invested on the 27th of June. So it is just a magic. It is correct.
Just a short.
It's less than 30 days.
Because we time them in time for our creditor payments. So we're always thinking of our cash flow requirements.
Yeah.
So that's approximately how much we expected we'd be needing. So that's why it's in the short term.
No, no, it's just had my banking hat back on.
Any further questions? There being none, is someone happy to move to receive the financial report? Councillor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Menzies. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried, thank you. Okay, that takes us to item 7.5. Submission on the MB building consensus review of the paper consultation 2023. On page 63 of your agenda. Joy.
Thank you. I'm here to present my report regarding the submission on the MB building consultation. I would like to start with an apology that the report itself was not ready for your review at this meeting. I've had some fairly competing priorities in the lead up to this due date. I am delighted to share that over the weekend, MB extended the due date of this report though, and therefore there is the opportunity to amend the recommendation that the approval of the CEB with the input of this council, if that's your preference, would be able to share and circulate that report in the coming days for you to be able to send some feedback through with probably a 1 week period, and then definitely be able to represent our community in this submission. Per my report, we did not have capacity to go out and actually get engagement from our community, which was the intention. And so having your input, I think, is really valuable into this submission. I do note, though, that this submission is open to the public, and our industry, our community are able to respond. But I recognise that as members of council, it's our responsibility to make sure that we fairly and equitably represent our community and our industry, as well as our own challenges and preferences throughout a consultation like this. I'll take the report as read, but I do note that this consultation is quite comprehensive. I think it was a 73-page options paper that we're responding to, and it covers a variety of topics. These topics are everything from promoting competition within the industry itself and products and material supply, right through to the efficiency and consistency of BCA's delivering a service nationwide. So it is a very interesting consultation, and I do encourage, if you have the opportunity to review it and our submission, that you do. I'm willing to take any questions.
So based on the initial work you did, was this the same piece of work that last year sort of came up and you did a bit of engagement with the sector as well? Was it a similar kind of?
This is the next step. So yes, that consultation submission was received by MB, and they have consolidated similar themes across the various topics. and I suppose refined what those next step options should be looking at. So this is a more consolidated and refined version, and I don't recall going out to our community for that consultation either.
So there wasn't any sort of engagement with the building sector, per se, or anything with that one?
No, other than general discussion in meetings with the sector that said the consultation's there and if you've got feedback, we're happy to receive it. We didn't actually go out and workshop with them of what their thoughts are and actively draw that out.
Any other questions?
Through your worship, do you have any concerns, if any? I mean, I know you've not yet completed the report, but the self-certification that's being suggested in this regime, the new one, are you happy to share your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. So we've highlighted the risks around self-certification that were realised in the 1991 self-certification that happened in New Zealand, because we've actually been through this process once before, and that is how we ended up with a leaky buildings situation. But it doesn't mean that every method would be the same. So we've recommended that self-certification has its merits, but that we would like to see an overhead similar to the accountability of an accreditation scheme that a BCA undergoes for a self-certifier, so that there is accountability, checks and balances, and there are a few ways that MB could go about that. Specifically, we're recommending that a further working group be established to really define what that would look like and bring more specifics to the table for councils and industry alike to either support or adjust before going ahead. So we've suggested some opportunities of how a scheme to audit that could look like, but we've actually recommended that a working group be established to really further define that.
So we have not, if I understand you correctly, we have not said we are fine with this as it stands, as it's been.
Correct. I think there's probably only one item in this whole report that we're saying we're happy with as is. The majority of it is a step forward because we're talking about it, and a step forward because we're consulting and we're figuring it out, right? Because the current scheme, it's recognised, is not broken, but it's not efficient. The risk report, though, that was released last year by MB indicates that New Zealand is 7th out of something like 213 around the world as far as efficiency of the building procedure and simplification of the building procedure and effectiveness. So we are in a top tier in and of itself. I think it's really good that we are constantly looking to continuously improve the way we go about things, because we can be more effective, we can be more efficient. But I don't think in many ways this paper has the ultimate end goal produced, but it's certainly a step towards getting there.
Thank you, Bishop. I think in response, this aligns quite nicely to the discussions we've had around the ease of doing business, alongside ensuring that we are discharging our responsibilities around that process. So how the two are able to meet, and it offers an opportunity as a feedback on where we can, as you said, increase that efficiency. So taking advantage of those opportunities as well. So I'll be really interested in reading through your response, and it's actually great that the date has been extended to enable us to do that. It's important. Thank you.
Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think what they're trying to do is great, but like you, Julie, I've certainly got concerns about the self-certification aspect of it, and we saw it all happen before with the leaky building aspect. And also the competition aspect. Am I right or am I wrong in that could end up sort of decimating council inspection teams, as it were?
We've said that it's actually unclear specifically what is going to be in the BCA space as far as creating competition is concerned. So our submission highlights the risk of creating competition for the consenting and inspection side of things, simply because if you make it financially beneficial to cut corners, and it just says we're going to.
Every time.
However, we do support and promote creating competition in the product and supply side of the market, because that is an area that we have seen it hold up the efficiency of our building in New Zealand, and we do want to see that change.
So the product aspect is another one that sort of worries me. We've seen it before with wallboard that was failed, and I've got a close experience with type of spouting that certainly, I don't know, the model trialled it in Alexandra in the summertime, but it certainly didn't work in Southland Rain. So we've got, I think the testing and accreditation of these products is an important part of building. So how do you see the results of what's being proposed on that in that part of it?
Well, this is the importance of councils making submissions. So we have a performance-based code. So the performance of the solution proposed in any building consent is evaluated, not just whether or not the product is approved or not approved. We have indicated that there are a number of scenarios where product certification and code mark being expanded would be beneficial for the industry. But where we're talking about designers providing multiple options for product substitution in the original application, we actually think that's going to slow things down a lot and create confusion both in the design and the construction side. So we've cautioned against that side of things. Products by nature of themselves do have a fairly rigid or structured evaluation process in New Zealand. So I think it really does come back to that performance-based code, and having a role such as a BCA that's evaluating will the performance of that design in its entirety meet that code or not.
Yeah, okay. I noticed there was mention of firefighters, and I don't see anything really about earthquake in it. And I mean, it's important that design of buildings takes into account emergency issues, etc. And then, of course, there's the other matters where building consent and resource consent, as in their local requirements regarding access ways and all the rest of it, that are still important.
Yes.
Part of it.
That's right.
Yeah. And wastewater. Anyway, okay. It's in good hands, I think.
It's a really interesting consultation topic, and I think that the more people that submit will tease out a lot of these concerns. The submission does clearly state that it is not looking at building code changes itself.
Saw that.
And it's not looking to change the liability side for council, so that joint and several liability, it's not looking to change. And so we've threaded through our submission the risks involved with not making those changes. If we're going to change the weight of responsibility, it needs to be done in some instances in its entirety, or will it actually be effective? So we've definitely touched on a lot of those topics as well.
Councillor Bakron.
Thank you, through your worship. I also wonder whether it's worth remarking there in the response that this is, to put it completely and diplomatically, tinkering around the edges. The standards themselves are not being addressed, are they? It's just the consent system. And I've gone back and I've looked at the open letter Mr. Scary wrote to IPENS, which caused, that was 2003. The issue still remains the standards and who's setting those standards, because as you rightly said, 7th in the consenting regime, so we don't seem to have a problem there. The problem lies in how good those standards are. And you only have to see now Queenstown ratepayers, every single one of them, I see the figure for is going to be extra $305 more in rates each year for the next 30 years is what they're going to pay. Whangarei's new civic center, $59 million, already leaky, and so on. So this does not address what is actually causing these problems, which is re-looking at those standards instead of just the regime which implements those.
Yes, and our submission does suggest that BCAs currently are very regulated. We're very reviewed. We're one of the most regulated in councils, really. And so there are opportunities for MB to look at other areas of those standards and quality of, design build to complement what we already have in place for BCAs, rather than just continuing to focus on the BCA side of things.
Just when it's complete, I'll read it.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Julie. Yes, the feedback I get suggests that something does need to be done to enable people to build in a timely fashion. And just to Councillor Burperei's point, what's happened in Queenstown, $160 million the ratepayers are on the hook for. It's quite shocking, really, that that's not being addressed, I don't think, in this piece of work. But the self-certification, can you explain to me who that would apply to if that was to go through?
Well, this consultation is essentially asking that question. If we introduce self-certification, who would it best apply to and how would it best be applied? And I think rather than recommending any specific, we're saying self-certification itself needs to be regulated, audited, and accountability created. So there are many options for how we go about that. It's more the way it's gone about rather than who it's applied to. At this point, I think that MB needs to be looking at. Same with anything, we start from that groundwork and build up. So we aren't making a recommendation, and I don't think I should, off the top of my head, make a recommendation because it's a really important topic, right? You could apply self-certification to many aspects of the building and construction industry. They're experts in their field, they do this work day in, day out, they know what they're doing. Right now, the Building Act doesn't allow them to make their own decisions on a building site. It must be according to the plans. So our submission is looking at that system as a whole and saying if you adjust one part, you would need to adjust these other parts as well to make it operate. Or if you make this part work independently, what is it? So that's certainly our perception of how we're approaching this consultation. I think exactly who we would recommend to have self-certifying, there are so many options. It's just how you go about establishing the checks and balances to make sure that scheme is effective and we don't end up with another leaky building situation.
See, if the self-certification applied to the builder or the homeowner, and there was and the liability fell to them, then you would think that would streamline things and there wouldn't be any requirement for checks and balances.
It might. Unfortunately, this particular consultation is not changing the joint and several liability component though. Therefore, self-certification would still involve councils and it would still involve that BCA role under the current proposal.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposition when you actually look at how many building companies fall over as well. And I think that has to be something that's taken into consideration. I certainly appreciate the scope of this, but it certainly occurs to me that there's potential opportunity for comment around things like, if things go wrong and there's a master build in place, then that master build, to all intents and purposes, has no value. Particularly if the build goes wrong partway through and a build goes bankrupt. So, and we've seen small builders go bankrupt, massive organisations go bankrupt. So if there could be comment, because it will affect process around looking at that financial viability, I think it would be really prudent to do that. Even looking at things like solvency of companies before they go into each new build scenario, however big that build is, whether it's a single house or it's a shopping centre. It could be applied across the board, and I certainly think that, councils continuing to accept that liability, if something goes wrong, shouldn't, again, we shouldn't have to be the fall guy on that.
I think there needs to be accountability to the certified builders and the master plumbers and all those sorts of organisations that actually wrap around.
They put those organisations in place for a reason, and you apply to be certified to those entities for a particular purpose. Even when we talk about that certification, again, yes, I think it's important to have the checks and balances, and sometimes, there probably are external parties that do have a greater skill set, like some of the engineers, perhaps over and above our own building inspectors. So where do you find the balance in actually being able to look at that? I think there's opportunity in that space. It's just, again, how it comes down to process, so that we can go back to Christine's point around ease of business and allowing projects to continue flow effectively.
Absolutely. And under the producer statement part of this document, we're definitely submitting that bringing a producer statement into the Building Act as a recognised document that can be relied on would be a really important positive step forward. And even increasing the rigour around producer statements, considering recent events, putting forward an option around how there could be a register that has random audits across it to ensure the rigidity of that system.
Well, thanks to Joy. It's been a really good discussion around that, and the wonderful helpers beside me have come up with a revised D and a new E, so I don't know if you can get that up on the screen behind us. So basically, taking advantage of that extension and what you said at the start, allowing the submission to be circulated to councillors and having the final delegated approval to the executive and the mayor. Is everyone comfortable with that? With a D and a new E.
It's going to come back here for comment.
It'll be emailed to councillors, and then with the final to the chief executive and myself on the final sign off on it.
I guess it'll just understood that councillors will need to submit their feedback. I don't know what day of the week, the 21st of August is, but to be able to have that incorporated into this, get it up to so that probably needs to be back by what, the 6th or
Covering
email, that would be great, thank you. Yeah.
Yes. So, Your Worship, should it not be draft submission? We just wand on not submissions then.
Would you like to do 2 submissions, John?
No, one was enough, thank you.
Also, with those changes up there, is someone in a position to move those? Councillor Greeny, second to Councillor Vaporai. I'll put the motion on the table. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you, Julie, and thank you in advance for the work that's going to come out to us.
Perfect, thank you all.
Now might be an opportune time to break for morning tea, so if we can come back in 15 minutes at say 25 past. 7.6, which is the greenhouse gas emissions baseline on page 139. And welcome, Marcus.
Kia ora tātou. So this report is reporting on the Southland District Council greenhouse gas emissions for the 2021-2022 financial year. So, as you're all aware, New Zealand signed up to the Paris Accord, and as part of that agreement, there's an expectation that we step towards carbon neutrality with our business and organisational operational components. So effectively, the other pieces around the forward planning, the forward projection with the long-term plan being developed at the moment. So trying to understand what we've got and then how do we start transitioning ourselves into a future that looks like low carbon and what are the steps we need to take and where we need to prioritise our energy and emphasis to achieve the best gains we can. So in the last 12 months, there's been a significant amount of work, and primarily from Bodika, our climate change lead, who's now resigned. So I guess this report is solely a piece of work that he's been working on for quite some time. We commissioned Great South to support us through this piece of work, purely because they've been doing a lot of this work with other organisations across Southland, and also they bring all their expertise. And it's worth mentioning too that as we were going through this piece of work, it wasn't just a tell us what we've got, Great South, it was a come and support the organisation to upskill and understand how carbon and greenhouse gas emissions works is completed, and what the different components are, and how we can start looking at the mechanisms that are inside of our control and to change the volume of greenhouse gases the organisation emits. So yeah, they supported us along with Bodika. We had a number of workshops to upskill all our team leaders in that space as part of the activity management plan, long-term plan process, so they can work on that. So effectively, second page of the report is the summary document, pretty much a table there that outlines where the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from. So overall, the organisation net emissions are 14,714 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So there's a few other bits and pieces of greenhouse gases, but they convert it all back to a CO2 equivalent. I'll note there on the fourth line, there's a forestry sink. That's a negative 2,000 tonnes. So that's, I guess, council's plantation forestry as it currently sits. It's ended up on the balance sheet, so it's giving us a wee bit of a credit there. Our overall net emissions for 21-22 is 14,700, and the full report is appended to my report as well, and there's a few recommendations in the back couple of pages. Page 173 of the agenda has the recommendations from that report around how council can start making more gains in reducing their carbon emission profile. So happy for any questions.
Just a little question for me around, I guess, the timing of this report was obviously done iteratively over time, and on page 148 there's a reference to the Southern Rural Viral Road, which is moved over to Fens, and I don't think that's really a part of, that's anymore, probably not a major in the scheme of the information, but just whether that's, will have a, like that kind of thing will have a material impact on the
148. Oh yeah. So the that graphic on that page was we're trying to identify the scope of what we considered was within the council's control, and the council's control was in the organisational boundary, the light blue box, and the purple aspects are deemed to be outside of council's control, although there's varying degrees of components that council's involved with. It's not actually something that I guess this table here can influence at a great extent. So those purple boxes in that graphic on 148 is effectively deemed to be outside of our emissions profile work, because it's not something that we can control those aspects. Yep, point taken.
Thank you. Through your worship. Marcus, our biggest ones seem to be the purchased goods and services and capital goods.
Yeah. Certainly. So the purchased goods and services, so that is captured on page 186 of the report, and it talks about the services provided to keep our operations running, so like the contractors and those sorts of things. So I guess some opportunities in that space is looking at how we go through procurement for some of those services.
I try to look at them, and no matter where we go, it is not change, is there? Because this is what the bulk of ours is, 11,000 out of the total one. And the other thing I will talk about is the methane ones we have on basically our wastewater, those treatment plants. And looking at that, this report is based on the ministry's guidance. I know on, I think it's last year's, is it 2022, March, the document that they created. And it is saying that where IPCC AR4 GWP global warming potentials are available, these are used. So that's 2007 IPCC AR4 report. It goes on to say where that they are not available, IPCC AR5 GWPs are used. The global warming potential from the report that came out in August of 2014, nearly a decade ago. Now, we are not looking at AR6 here. That report was IPCC did that 2007 report, 2013. AR6 came out in 2021. And according to that, and I think I've circulated an email to everyone where my comments are from. But according to that report, AR6 working group, it very clearly states that methane, which is our primary issue where wastewater plants are concerned, is being overstated using GWP 100, overstates the effect of methane by a factor of 3 to 4. If you could simply get the ministry looking at the latest science in how, or at least email them and start asking some questions here from center government that why are we basing all of these, we keep updating them every year. This is March 22, the guidance Buddhika has used. It's outdated. AR6 working group very clearly states methane has to be decreased, so it should be divided by 3 or 4, so that figure on page 146 of 1758 tons of carbon emissions where wastewater treatment plants should come down to a quarter of that or a third.
Yeah.
And why is the ministry not listening? Why are we so dependent on a decade-old papers when the science has moved on?
Certainly, and through you, Your Worship, we're governed by the Ministry for the Environment.
I completely realize that.
So effectively everything they put out there, this is the methodology, this is the approach, and this is how all of local government need to be working through this piece of work. So taking in a factor of how many litres go into the plant, what sort of plant is it, and then you can
completely agree, but are we denying the fact that we've had 3 or 4 of our countries leading, in fact, nearly a dozen leading professionals be a part of the AR6 working group, be a part of the ones that came out with the report that states the effect of methane is overstated by 3 to 4 times? We are stuck in 2013. And if this was done, more than looking at going through the rigmarole of looking at suppliers and procurement and all, that's 1758 coming down to something like 400 and we are done here. We could just close the book and move on, continue with business as usual. Have we ever approached the ministry asking them, just a simple question, why are we denying the existence of AR6 report?
No, we haven't done that piece of work. Effectively, we've just been using the methodology that they've provided.
I don't blame you. That's the guidance you have from last year, but AR6, we've had New Zealand professors collaborate on that one, be a part of that working group, and the ministry is not updating anything. I think it might be worthwhile putting in an email and asking them, how long do we continue to sit in 2013 and keep using those same matrices?
Yeah, certainly, and I think there's a bit of an interplay between the Climate Commission and the MFE and taking out, this is how New Zealand is going to start reporting and tracking it, and this is, there's certainly some refinement. This baseline is certainly the first cut, and as I guess the Three Waters process moves forward, then it may be something that comes, Three Waters will be outside of Council's control and no longer reported in this format, would probably go through to whichever entity would be taking over that.
The wastewater ones, but as long as they are on our books, it just seems to me to be a breeze to just ask them, just give us a clarification why we are not using those figures, and then we don't need to,
certainly
hanging our suppliers there.
And I think one of the things that we were working through with this baseline report was it's very much tied to a work program. So say, for example, with COVID, less tourists coming through, there's less volume going through our wastewater treatment plants. Depending on our spend on road resurfacing or renewals or footpaths, the metrics associated with our emissions is going to change year to year. So although it's a baseline report for 21-22, if in the next year we commit to a big work program, we put in more bridges and we do a whole lot of different things, that's going to skew how much emissions are going to be generated, and we may not actually be able to track from 14,000 this year to 12,000 next year and 10,000 and work down in a way. I just trying to understand where's our starting point and where do we need to focus our energy and attention to actually get the best bang for buck with our investment around trying to make sure that we're getting things in the right place. So it's more sort of representative as opposed to a cold, hard fact of
Because
This is where,
again, if it was being uniformly used, I would still sort of try to understand that, all right, they've used AR5 or AR4 in the other ones, but in the climate change model, sea level rise and so on, they're using AR6. But when they ask you to tabulate the council's greenhouse emissions, hey, let's go back to 2013. It doesn't make sense. There has to be some consistency here. And I think we do owe a responsibility to our ratepayers to at least query that why are we not using AR6 uniformly?
I guess there's a risk around that as well. If we're doing our baseline based on that, and then the modelling changes later on, we're going to be comparing apples with oranges as well. We need to keep a consistent approach when we're comparing.
And if we are using the latest report on climate change, why are we, not using the same one here? That's my question. Thank you, Marcus.
Through you, Worship, I know that you don't want to hear the word methane over and over again, but I'm going to say methane. With regards to sort of wastewater treatment plants and biogases and all that sort of stuff, have we done a bit of research, or is there space in Southland to be able to sort of capture that gas and reuse the energy somehow?
yeah, through you, Your Worship, there is that technology and that process is in existence elsewhere across the country. We haven't got any of that in Southland at this present point in time, but it's certainly something that you can look at. And I know, some of the plants, so for example, even the regional landfill, instead of releasing the methane, they actually burn it off. So you release the CO2, which is a lower factor than methane. So you can actually reduce your emissions somewhat by burning the methane off and creating CO2 with a flare. Or there are other options where you can actually turn that into electricity as well. So those are all options and solutions that we can look at to reduce the emissions around methane in the future. But also that comes at a cost too. So I guess that's some of the work that the individual departments are going to start looking at and going, okay, well, what is the cost and where's the benefit, and how do we actually prioritise energy and investment into these different options, and who benefits when, and how long the payback on some of this investment, because we want to be doing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, once again, we sort of keep circling back to the same thing with regards to the huge emphasis and need and requirement for climate change initiatives. So yeah, really interesting, and I know it's another conversation. It's a lengthy conversation. It's going to take a lot of time and money and effort, staff resource, in order to be able to look at that. But as you say, if there are other parts of the country and other parts of the world who have very, very similar models to us, it'd be interesting to see what it's like.
Certainly, and I guess it's always good to compare where we are with our cousins beside us. Invercargill City Council's got one great big plant, a whole lot easier, whereas Southland District Council's got plants everywhere. So the investment into different processes would look quite different depending on how things were done.
There's an interesting comment from me as well, that vehicle fleet one, given the geographic size of the area and the number of Ks that we do, that's actually a lot lower than I actually expected as well. And I know a neighbouring council, when they did theirs, were quite surprised by the smaller size of that one. Councillor Pye?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Marcus. Page 156, Alliance. Are those, is the CO2 that's generated there, does that fall under our umbrella?
156.
6 on that chart.
So I know with the Wallacestown wastewater treatment system, that wastewater is, I think, taken to the Alliance plant and managed through the Alliance wastewater treatment system and discharge. So I think there is instead of having two systems close in proximity, the Alliance group managed the council waste through their existing discharge, and there's an arrangement in the background there, but I'm not sure of the specific details.
Because there's a big amount, this must be the Alliance's wastewater here, 22,000 cubic metres, I think that is a day. So that's not Wallacestown, that's the Alliance. But is that 22,000, is that falling under our emissions, or is that going to be separated into Alliance groups? What do they have to do?
Doesn't look.
We don't need to account for it twice, do we?
You're correct.
I'll take the onus for it at all.
Oh yeah, I'll certainly have a look at that and ask the question.
Cool. Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. It probably doesn't make any difference, Marcus, but I see on page 153 you're talking about the 155 community hall getting a ton of free coal. I don't know if that arrangement still exists. They cut it out for the local houses. Did they cut it out for the hall as well?
My understanding was that we're still going to the hall.
Okay, right.
About a tonne a year or something like that.
Okay. And I see the point about fertilisers that we use on page 173, and although it's not measured, I'm just wondering, do we need to be using nitrogen fertilisers? Right, just something to look at. And then on page 174, just about harvesting our forests. I mean, is it worth doing an exercise to see if actually we're better to maintain some forest as a carbon sink, not harvest?
Yeah, and I think it's probably an understanding of, what we want to derive out of the forestry. I guess when those forests went in, it was primarily around benefits associated with logs going to market, whereas I guess the ETS has shifted, and also I guess there's some wider Indigenous biodiversity benefits that could be gained from looking at a 10% when you're replanting, going 10% each time you harvest to Indigenous as opposed to going whole forest into Indigenous. You could go at a 10%, 20% year on year each harvest, so you're incrementally building a Indigenous forest that you could harvest down the track and smoothing out the harvesting of that Indigenous forest as well. So I guess forestry provides a number of benefits, and maybe it's a bit of a review of what benefits are we after in regards to forestry, and how do we best position ourselves for the right benefits to achieve.
Councillor Byers again.
Thank you, Your Worship. Oh, I like that, the idea of planting something other than pine trees, Marcus. You're looking further into the future with that suggestion, I think. Something, trees that could be more useful to the local economy. But I just wanted to caution, we spend a lot of time and effort here working on their carbon footprint, but I do think we're not encouraged to think about the pollution, and we've got this aquaculture brochure here with the salmon farms trumpeting on about how little carbon they use and saying that they use about 1/10 of what it takes to produce beef. But the pollution that comes from a salmon farm, the caged fish being fed antibiotics on a daily basis, being fed growth hormones, and this coming into the environment and disrupting local fish populations. So here they are saying that they're clean and green, but in actual fact, just based on that carbon analysis, that if you looked at the whole operation, they would be one of the most polluting forms of farming in the world. And you don't have to look far around the world to see what sort of disruption salmon farms are having in different parts. Go to British Columbia, for example.
Just noting this report, though, is about SDC's emissions rather than, like, SDC doesn't run the salmon farms. This is more about what
Sure, I just wanted to bring to light the point that there is a little bit of greenwashing here, just focusing on the carbon issue, when in actual fact it would be more beneficial to this community if we looked at pollution as a whole.
Certainly, and I guess the final comment I'd like to make through you, Your Worship, while we're 14,000 tonnes, of our emissions for that financial year, we could buy ourselves out of that by purchasing carbon credits and being carbon neutral. But I don't think the organisation wants to be in that space. I think we want to be innovating and trying to reduce the amount of emissions, not just trying to buy our way out by purchasing credits. So, yeah.
Cool. Councillor Byers, if you're very short, I'll let you.
It'll be short, Your Worship. Thank you. And the vehicles, talking to electric vehicles, but the vehicles that we've got, diesel, whilst they perhaps pollute a bit more per kilometre, they're in existence already. So it would seem to make more economic and environmental sense to utilise the life of existing vehicles rather than going through the process of building new vehicles, building new batteries, and with a questionable life and difficult to recycle. So
certainly. So through your worship, we'll be looking to, as the vehicle stock ages and we're looking at replacements, then a bit more analysis around what sort of replacement is suitable for the business needs and on that renewal process, as opposed to ditching all our vehicle stock tomorrow and getting all electric or hybrids. That's unsustainable. We're better off as we work through that renewal process, looking at what fits our needs.
Cool. Well, thank you, Marcus, and I'll move from the chair that we received that report, and it's good to have a baseline as we know what we're working with, albeit some of the questionable kind of measurements on there, but it's good to have that baseline. So do we have a second?
I'll second.
Councillor Duffy. I'll put the motion on the table. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Carried. Thank you, Marcus. So that takes us to item 7.7. 79, the voting system for the 2025 elections. Slot committee advisor. Musical chairs.
Good morning, Mayor and councillors. The purpose of this report is to obtain a decision on which voting system would be used for the 2025 local elections. Council has the opportunity to review the voting system that is used for elections and to change from the current voting system on or before 12 September. As you will be aware, there are two voting systems that can be used by local authorities. First past the post, FPP, and single transferable vote, or STV. Council currently uses FPP, and if it doesn't change the system to STV, then FPP will be used for the 2025 elections. If the public disagree with Council's decision on the voting system, they can demand a public poll. Council can also decide to hold a poll. There are key dates for polls which are detailed in the report. As you would have read in the report, it clearly outlines how FPP and STV operate as voting systems. In brief, under FPP, voters tick beside the name of the candidate they wish to vote for, and the candidate with the most votes wins. Under STV, instead of ticking a candidate, voters rank the candidates in their order of preference. In order to be elected, a candidate must reach a quota. Once your preferred candidate has enough votes to be elected or has so few votes that they are out of the reckoning, a portion of your vote can be transferred to your next preferred candidate. Significance and engagement and community views. Although this is not a minor decision, staff have assessed that the decision on the voting system for the next election does not meet the threshold to be considered significant in relation to Council's significance and engagement policy and the Local Government Act. Despite not being a significant decision though, a thorough community engagement process has been undertaken by staff. Staff completed an advertising campaign that included radio, social media, local papers and posters in council area offices and libraries, and the advertising campaign directed people to Council's Make It Stick website where they were able to give their feedback. We received a total of 224 valid responses from individuals on Make It Stick, and 80% of those responses were in favour of FPP. Additionally, a report containing information on the voting systems was presented to each community board, and each board was invited and encouraged to provide feedback on their preferred system. 4 community boards gave feedback, and those 4 boards all preferred FPP. Staff believe that through the community engagement process, Council has a good understanding of the views and preferences of the persons that are likely to be affected or interested in this matter, and the FPP is the preferred voting system. There are 2 options for Council to consider. Option 1 being not to change and confirm the use of FPP. Option 2 being to change to STV. Staff recommend the first option. The report outlines a number of advantages and disadvantages of both systems. If you would like me to give you a brief summary, I can do that. Would you like me to give you
a summary of it, or we've got a good understanding?
The recommendations for this report are on page 180 of your agenda, and staff are recommending that Council notes that the statutory deadline for resolving to change the voting system is 12 September, confirms that it will not change the voting system, and confirms the use of FPP for the 2025 and 2028 elections. And 3, notes that the public notice will be given of the electors' right to demand a poll, and that this notice will also include the decision on the electoral system. If you have any questions, Lou and myself will be happy to answer those.
Just the initial, I think just something else to consider when we're deliberating this is the fact that the Future for Local Government report actually recommended the STV one. Although our community's obviously given us quite a strong guide the other way. Just a question from me as well, the cost of doing a poll. Do you have an indicative cost of running that kind of?
So you worked up, yes, and that was $75,000 was the cost of doing a standalone poll on.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you. I have no problem with the decision that you recommended. I am just, you said that when you were talking that this decision was important, but we somehow deemed, like the staff have assessed, it's not significant. How is that worked upon? You said it's obviously a significant decision, but staff assess that it's not.
Through you, Your Worship. Under our significance and engagement policy, it sets some basic levels of significance, and it's around the effects of the decision and the cost of what the infrastructure might be, if it's around infrastructure, and the levels of costs. And under that, this doesn't meet a significant decision. It's important to the community as a whole, but it's not significant at that level. That it's set.
There is some discretion there as well. I'll take it offline, Reese, and ask you to give it of that relevant bit. Thank you.
It's an interesting word because, like, we're saying it's not significant, but we're not saying that it's not significant.
Is it important versus significant?
Yeah. Are there any other questions or comments, Councillor O'Brien?
Through Your Worship. Just in my own community, when the subject was brought up around whether we should do first past the post or single transferable vote, the overarching feeling that seemed to come through, and I'm asking this question with regards to transparency, I suppose, is that I just felt that it was too hard and it was deemed to be complicated to adopt the new STV model. Are we doing enough to be able to illustrate and express to our communities that in real terms it's not that difficult? Like, you know, in theory, the theory works either way, but the way in which we're delivering it seemed to, and I'm just saying that's the reaction in general, and I don't know what it's been like for other community boards, that seemed to be, are we doing enough? Like, yeah, question.
Answer that. Oh, yeah. There you go.
Through you, Your Worship. When we were writing the reports to community boards and to council, we tried to keep a neutral position in explaining the two systems and the perceived complexity, I think, may answer your question. So acknowledging that there's some perceived complexity of the system and that there was some community education and if there was a change to that system.
And I also think, sorry, through you, Your Worship, too, that in the advertising material and the details that we put out as part of the community engagement, we gave really good neutral descriptions of what both of them are and the values of the advantages and disadvantages of both. So I think for a lot of voters, the difficulty that probably people have seen in it is that when we had district health boards, that was an STV system, and then on the same voting paper you had a FPP system for the councils. And I think that's where some of the confusion and misunderstanding happened, because you were trying to do two different systems on one voting paper, and it got, you really had to consciously work out which one you were voting for. So
I don't think that helped STV at all at the time. There was quite an outcry about the fact that so many of the votes for the health boards ended up being invalid because people just ticked one box and didn't put a score or anything in. So.
I think part of it as well, we've got that challenge of actually increasing the voter turnout prior to looking at what the voting method is. In fact, 47% is not a successful voter turnout, and
it's among the better ones in the country.
Yeah, and we did well. So
Sorry, and I was going to say, and through you, Your Worship, it's also about the number of people that stand. If you've only got 3 people standing for 3 seats, then STV doesn't have a lot of value in it, does it?
Councillor Spraggan.
No, I was just going to endorse the comment that you made, that I can't see any reason for change at the moment. There needs to be an education, and we need to really work on getting the involvement of the communities into the, onto the council, and in particular head towards younger people and get them involved in.
So maintaining that neutrality is absolutely paramount. Having that neutral that's really constitutionally applicable to us. But as you say, sort of making sure that the communities at large have enough education to comfortably make an informed decision.
Well, I agree with that sentiment. I've been a long time supporter of STV. I think it's a much more democratic voting system. I was disappointed when MMP came in that we didn't actually take the STV option, but people just didn't understand it then, and they still don't. And I'm not blaming anyone here for that, but it's unfortunate. But I certainly, and Fonterra have been doing it for a number of years because it is a better system, and for that reason I'll be voting that way.
If there's no further discussion, we've got our recommendations on page 180. Now, so A is D, are your standard ones, noting the deadline is the 12th, so D is okay. So I get the general feeling that we are looking at continuing with first past the post. So that leaves E as it stands and F as well. So someone in a position to move A through to F. Councillor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Spraggan. Is there any further discussion on those? There being none, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Aye. Duffy, you want that recorded?
Yes, please.
I declare that motion carried. Thank you. Okay. So we now move on to our workshop for the introduction to the representation review. Oh, sorry, yeah, cool. Getting my advice here now. Adjourn the meeting for the workshop, but we'll continue live streaming the workshop as well. So we'll adjourn the meeting and the representation review workshop.
So we'll just get our slides up.
Just getting the slideshow up. 30 seconds.
That photo from Scotland, Jane?
Where is it?
Southland. Morning everyone. So today we just wanted to have a sort of introductory talk about the fact that we have the 2024 representation review
coming our way. And so there will be quite a lot of work being undertaken by the staff over the next about 15 or 16 months to work this project through. Rach, can you possibly flick to the first point? So a representation review is all about looking at the structure and the governance of a council. So it's looking at the number of councillors, whether they're elected by ward or at large across the district as a whole, boundaries and wards and where they sit, and also looking at community boards, whether they're required, and if they are, boundaries, names, membership arrangements and subdivisions. So that's sort of the scope of the review, and that's sort of where we have to land is with that final structure.
Do you want to just explain the subdivisions in case anyone's not sure?
So you can have subdivisions within a community board, which is sort of when you need representation. Perhaps it's a long community board area, large area, and it would like to have representation in different parts of it. So people would stand for one subdivided area of that community board as a candidate and get elected onto the board regionally, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Similar concept to wards forming the district.
Yeah. Why? So we have to do this legally every 6 years, and it was last done in 2018. So we have to go on and get it done. And I'll explain the exact timeline soon, but we're due to sort of start the process now, and it'll be in effect for the next elections, whatever the outcome is. And so you'll be aware, particularly in relation to the first one, that there's some decisions that sort of lead up into the representation review process. Today we did the voting system decision, and staff are in the process at the moment of doing some early engagement on Maori wards and probably aiming to get a report to council up on that in September. So yeah, those are two lead-in bits of work that do impact the representation review that we will work through prior to the early process of the rep review. So you're probably quite familiar with the current arrangements, 5 wards, electing 12 councillors, and then the mayor sitting outside of that structure. And in relation to community boards, we've obviously got the 9 boards, and 2 of those have subdivisions, which is Ariti and Northern. And I just thought I'd, a lot of you will know this, but in the 2019 representation review, there was quite a big change in our structure. So we went from having 8 community boards and 19 sort of subcommittees representing local areas. We call them community development area subcommittees. So at that time, prior to the 2019 elections, there were 175 elected members, and in the old structure, a third of the district didn't have a local representative through that. So those community development area subcommittees and community boards didn't even represent everyone in the district. So there was a big change that was undertaken to get to the structure of community boards that we have now. Okay.
I drew the short straw with the longest explanation, so bear with me. What factors do we consider in the review? Legislation provides 3 factors that are to be considered during the representation review. The first factor is identifying Southland's current communities of interest, which of course may have changed since the last review. In order to identify the community of interest, we will be looking at 3 dimensions. The perceptual dimension. This takes into account a sense of belonging to an identified area, geographical features, local history, demographics, economic and social activities. The functional dimension. How does an area meet the needs of the community? Schools, shopping areas, community and recreational facilities, providing employment, and we will also look at transport and communication links. Thirdly, the political dimension, the ability to represent the interests of local communities, which includes non-council structures such as local iwi and special interest groups. Communities of interest can be identified at different levels. For example, our entire district is a community of interest. At the last review, our current wards were identified as communities of interest. And then down another level, the communities that correspond to the community boards are identified as communities of interest. And down further again, of course, subdivisions of community boards are also communities of interest. So you'll be seeing from that communities of interest can be grouped together to form a larger community of interest. Step 2 of the process, once we've identified the communities of interest, we need to look at how are these communities effectively represented. This is where it is considered how many councillors there should be and the way in which those councillors should be elected. So from wards, elected by wards or from the whole district, which we call at large, in order to provide effective representation of communities of interest within the district. Effective representation is about ensuring access of the population to elected members and vice versa, access by elected members to the population. Effective representation means ensuring that communities of interest are not split between wards, and similarly, that communities of interest are not grouped together without having some commonality between them. Boundaries of wards should support local electors' identification with the area and encourage participation in local democracy. And finally, ideally, ward boundaries should coincide with community board boundaries, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. Our third and final factor is how, and this is nice, it involves maths, how are these communities fairly represented by electors? And this is called the plus or minus 10% rule. The purpose here is to ensure that each councillor represents approximately the same number of people. Legislation requires that the population of each ward divided by the number of members to be elected by that ward be within 10% of the average of the population per councillor. As an example, if on average each councillor represented 500 people, but then you had one councillor elected by a ward that only had a population of 100, it is not creating fairness of representation. In order to achieve fairness of representation, in order to meet that plus or minus 10% rule, communities of interest may need to be regrouped or ward boundaries adjusted, which will mean returning back to step 2, looking at effectiveness. These final 2 steps can be repeated multiple times and balanced to ensure that a proposed structure meets both of these factors. Before you all panic, of course, there may be sufficient grounds to apply for an exception to the plus or minus 10% rule when we apply to the Local Government Commission or LGC with the final proposal. Examples of exceptions previously recognised and endorsed are the Stewart Island Rakiura ward, which has been endorsed by the LGC as being appropriate to ensure effective representation of this isolated island community. And the Waihopo Toitoi ward has been previously endorsed to ensure that the ward boundaries coincide with the community ward boundaries. My final point before I hand you back to Robin, community boards, the nature and structure of community boards are considered within the review. We look again at the names, boundaries, number of elected members and whether they should be subdivided. The process of ensuring fair and effective representation of the communities of interest is repeated again. So steps 2 and 3 are repeated in respective community boards. And of course we can look at subdivisions again to ensure that there's effective representation of the community at the community board, just like we look at wards.
So the governance team have mapped out a bit of a plan to go about this project, and this is our tentative plan at the moment. There might be some changes along the way potentially. Advice is to go about the representation review with a reasonably open mind, and so there's good evidence to support the communities of interest that you find, and so when you develop your proposal you've got good evidence and background, so you're starting with an open mind and a reasonably open book. The process is very legally prescribed once you get into the stage of having an initial proposal. The early steps are we'll probably try and start our engagement with the community in November, December this year, and it'll be a very thorough engagement process. The feedback will then be discussed with council, and there'll be quite a lot of development of the initial proposal over the first few months of 2024, and you're trying to come to a point of developing an initial proposal which will then get consulted on. There's a stringent consultation and requirement to have hearings around that formal consultation process, and then council has to develop a final proposal and you have to give like a notice about that, and there's a 1 month period after that where people can lodge objections to the proposal. If there's objections or appeals, or you're outside the plus or minus 10% rule for any of your wards or subdivisions, then you have to refer it to the Local Government Commission. So if, for example, Stewart Island Rakiura means there's a ward, we would be going to the Local Government Commission. The Local Government Commission decision is final, with the exception that there could be a judicial review or there can be an appeal on a point of law only. So it's a reasonably, it's a decision. And then obviously that determination is in place for the 2025 elections for that new structure will be. Did I miss anything, ladies? We did just actually check in with Councillor Keast as well, because last time she was quite actively involved in the representation review process, and also in a working group that was formed. And I just asked nicely if Julie could perhaps give us a bit of her perspective of how that went and what the process is like. Julie, sorry.
That's fine, Robert. I usually have something to say about it. It was an interesting process because for me that 175 representatives only actually covering a third of the population was it wasn't equitable, and so it being that those CDAs, as we called them, were subcommittees of council, they were very prescribed and driven by the process of council, very formal, and by the time they weren't really fit for purpose, because people wanted a more informal or approachable sort of mandate, I suppose, to be able to come through to council. And so the idea of having large community boards, but there's the idea that those community boards would engage with the community groups that were quite active in the areas, particularly outside the CDAs, to actually get things done in those areas, that would continue, and it would allow us to bring more of a community view forward. So it was that sort of was my thought process, although you have to start with a blank canvas, so like how many councillors do you actually need, and then from there drilling down into wards and communities of interest in wards and down. So it was a very interesting process to go through, and there was lots of debates around whether Stewart Island should remain, or
where we should go,
or around the city is sort of like we've currently got the two subdivisions in the Wallace-town Makarewa one, because they were acknowledged that they probably they think more about Invercargill, like that. So it was there was a lot of thinking involved, and it was a good process to be a part of in those initial stages, and then of course it then had to go to the commission. So we've got what we've got now, which I'll be interested to see the feedback on it from the engagement process, really, as to how people believe that it's working.
And did you play much of a role in the engagement process itself, Julie?
It probably went out to all the CDAs and that, and so probably staff that delivered that sort of the information about thinking about how we could do it. But certainly tried to encourage people to think that, this might be a good way to skip round the processes that the subcommittees needed to follow to have things happen. So I think it's getting there.
CDAs are very differently legislated.
Yes.
And I think that was one of the key things when the representation review was done. They didn't have that same ability. They didn't really have the same decision-making ability that a community board had. They didn't have that same disconnection.
They did. They're very different.
They were very, very different.
Rules around the community boards. They can actually disagree with council, whereas the subcommittee can't disagree with the final decision. And so, it gives it more local voice, I felt.
I think the other thing that I noticed having gone through it is that time's actually helped. That first round of elections after the rep review, perhaps some of those CDA areas hadn't really kind of sorted themselves out, whereas this time round, for example, in Fiordland, we've got a specific person on the board that's from Manapuri, whereas the first time round it was the board had to make a conscious decision to, manage that engagement process. So it's, I think certainly it's bedded down over time.
Although from the other side of it, as the board having to make a conscious decision to go to that community isn't always a bad thing. You think about everybody's responsible
or any community, any element of part of
specific area.
I think for myself, having been involved in a CDA through that process and challenging it a lot myself, as Julie will attest to, that I think there's some lessons that we can learn from the process, from not from the actual process that was run in the council. I think that group was done, that part was done quite well, but the expectation sort of setting and meeting, there was some gaps there, I think, and some, like not long before the process started, the CDAs were told that you actually can't. The power was kind of taken away from the CDAs at the same time, which put a bit of animosity into people who said you can't actually submit to council or put submissions in to council, which is something that they've been doing for a long time. But I think to what Julie was saying before as well, the fact that some CDAs only met twice a year too. So I think the model that we've got now has come a long way since then, and I'm certainly in support of what we're working with now, based on what used to be there. I think we have plugged those gaps quite well, and it was. But yeah, I think there are some lessons from that one too.
In addition to the engagement, is probably more connection now that more people are represented. So you get more connected communities.
And it's almost encourage people to think a little bit wider than their own patch as well. And before you had 6, I mean, there's an advantage having 6 people looking after a very small area, having the same 6 people looking after, well, different 6 people now, but looking after a wider area. And I guess that's where the subdivisions come in the Northern Board, where you've got quite a wide geographic area, ensuring that you do get coverage from those spaces. You don't end up with everyone all from Lumsden. You actually encourage people from Osborne and Athelgaston to be in there as well.
Yeah, and absolutely, from speaking from personal experience as well, Rob, I remember the CDAs, I've been on 2 former CDAs in 2 different areas. And the level of accountability and objectivity was questionable, I think, at a CDA level from time to time. When you have that sort of smaller number of people, it unfortunately, I guess it attracted, it had the potential to attract a certain subsection of the community who went there with, I guess, an agenda, and a lot of people struggled with that. Conversely, as you've said, as soon as the CDAs were disbanded, there was a hue and cry and uproar, and I remember that well. But I think, with the benefit of time, as someone mentioned earlier, as Sarah mentioned earlier, we've kind of learned a lot, and I think those same people would now go, I think things have started to work out okay now.
And that was the geographical thing of the communities of interest is quite interesting for me, because the Waihapai Toitoi is, population-wise, it's one of the bigger ones and has more representatives. When I look at where the people that are currently on the board are voted from, there's a really good distribution across the way. So because it would, I might have thought that they perhaps needed a subdivision, like to make sure that sort of it wasn't a skew in the numbers
undue, like there was a lack of representation in the area just because the numbers like the Southland area as opposed to Wyndham, Edendale, Woodlands, Remu, where that's where the great number of the population is.
I think one of the biggest challenges associated with community development subcommittees, and I'll use Northern as an example because there are three, will be, I guess, getting the people to stand up and to actually, fill those places. As we know, it's hard enough to get people to stand for election in the first place. So I'm sure that Northern will be quite challenging in that respect. If we were to look at the three subcommittees. Yeah. That's part of our job, right?
Yeah, part of this exercise is actually advertising the fact of, when we're going out there for a consultation on it, advertising the strength of what we've got or what we could have if people want to do it differently, but actually reducing that apathy and engaging.
Yeah, it's our job to increase the appetite for it, right? Yeah.
I was just going to say the other thing that in the Ariti board last time, it was a fairly close decision, and I think you'll probably find that will still be a voice that's there. The town-facing southern end and the Winton-facing central Southland, I think that's probably still there, and it has been a challenge for both boards to kind of get a grasp of the size and scale of the communities that they're not connected with. So that's definitely been, overall I think the structure is good, but I think there's been a challenge in the Reedy ward.
So, as I mentioned just previously, last time there was an elected member working group, and I think on that working group there were members of the Community Development Area subcommittees, I think maybe two, and two from community boards, and I think there's a couple of councillors, wasn't three. So we just wanted to have a quick chat about whether there was an appetite to have a similar group to support the project this time round. So we thought possible terms of reference for the group could be to give feedback and inform points for the review, provide direction and ideas, guiding principles. Like last time there was guiding principles established which were really helpful when you were trying to then group your communities of interest, and it was things like ensuring everyone has representation. It was, I don't know, do you remember any of that? Putting you on the spot. There was a list, but they were quite helpful and they seemed quite good to me when I've looked at the previous project. Also looking at some of the engagement approaches perhaps and giving some feedback. So if there was this group, we'd probably put some terms of reference up to this table just to get support for that, and we'd anticipate that group would feed back into council as well. It wouldn't have any decision-making powers or anything, it would just be to help support the project. The alternative would be to just have more council workshops, so that would be the other way to progress it. So I was just interested if there was an appetite really just for some feedback.
I think the key in this one, and probably some constructive feedback from last time around, the key this time is to actually involve the community boards a lot more. So I totally agree with having a working group guiding it, but I think we do need to engage really well with all of our community boards and the members to make sure that their voice is actually being heard quite early on in the process.
Yeah.
3 months.
Always just highlighted that we have such a very busy schedule with council, with the LTP process and everything going through as well. Just finding council workshop times might be quite challenging, and whether that would be more practical for the working group. But I mean, really, I'm happy to take the steer of the group on this one.
Well, it's handy to have the working group actually with a dedicated focus on it rather than, I don't know what everyone else thinks, but...
You're going to get more cut through, aren't you, with a working group rather than sort of ad hoc having workshops, I think.
Keith might be wanting to chair it again too.
Yeah, I'm sure she'd love to.
I didn't chair it last time.
I would.
But I certainly was on it.
It's basically cheated.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
I'm just thinking, like asking who from the community board wants to contribute and sort of were able.
We do have another community board chairs meeting coming up, so it might be something we can just quickly ask at that if there's any interest in helping support it.
And also some ideas from the community boards as well as to how they think it might work. They might have some feedback into the process.
Your worship, how big was the working group last time?
6. There was 2 CDAs, 2 council and 2 board.
Yeah.
It was 3 councillors, so I think so. It was probably 7.
Including staff?
And then staff on top of that.
Okay, so there is enough of an interest to put a paper up, perhaps, just to thank you for the feedback. I'm on the wrong one myself. To the end. Oh no, with the question slide.
I think it's frozen.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
So we thought we'd take this opportunity just to ask some pretty high-level questions, really, just to, I guess, start very early discussions on engaging with this group about the review. We'll obviously do our own internal investigations too, and looking at, and we've already been looking at the most recent census data, which isn't particularly recent, but just whether you as a group are aware of any changes in how the community is operating in terms of settlement movements. I mean, we are aware of some settlement changes. Sorry, Julie.
Oh, no, I just think what sprung to mind there was that probably something that has evolved in that time period is actually the catchment goals.
Yep.
And, just looking at how they fit within our current boundaries. I think there's about 36 of them. So, like how they, whether that changes community connection out there, I suspect it does, but whether it may just strengthen what we've already, like where we have got our boundaries, but then it may highlight some differences as well too.
That's a good idea.
Mesh blocks.
Oh yeah, they're almost as bad as matrices actually.
Okay, just to clarify for your understanding about how the population in the communities are measured, the system is through a mesh block system, and each mesh block has got to at least have enough people in it that it's not the people in it are not identifiable. However, it's quite a juggling act by the mapping team to try and make sure that the communities of interest still fit in with these mesh blocks. And when it comes down to that, the mesh blocks probably take some precedence over the community of interest, just so you're aware, because sometimes you might go, in the process we may be looking at things that you might be going, well, actually they probably fit better over here, but we may not be able to fit them over there in terms of how it's going to work.
That's it, yeah. The boundaries obviously all manoeuvre around mesh block units. So.
And the plus and minus 10%.
Yeah. We did definitely get a steer last time from the local government commission. They don't like breaking communities of interest, though, do they? So, yeah. But so keen for any thoughts from the group about whether has there been any radical change out there that you would think that the communities of interest have altered? Obviously, we're aware of some new subdivision developments, and we're aware that some of our towns have slightly increasing populations. I'm just interested if there's any thoughts.
I think it'll be worth bringing those questions to the community boards as well, whether you do it in a survey or just bring it as a report to each board meeting. I don't know if you've got enough time in that cycle to come through, but getting it at that local coalface level would be.
Well, just a couple of questions. My recollection I've been through one or two of these now, that initially the government or the local government commission was very rigid about that plus or minus 10%, but they relaxed it a bit later. And I remember at one point Dipton was going to get put in with, and that didn't go down at all, and it didn't really make any sense. Just regarding the population, is that information coming from the census? Or have you got other access, or what?
The most recent one at this point.
Not the most recent.
I don't think, I think we've used 2018, we won't have access to the new one.
Right.
I think it'll come out right at the end of the process.
Not due out till about March.
So the previous one wasn't that reliable, was it? Right. And the other question that came up at the start, besides the voting thing, is about Maori Ward. So what point do we have that
So
conversation?
Earlier, before the engagement process, obviously, because the decision will have to be made before we start doing the reproval engagement. So that decision has to be made by, is it 20 November, Mika? About then. But so we're aiming to, we're engaging at the moment about that with local iwi. And yeah, so we're intending at this stage, tentatively, to have a report in September to the council on that.
Well, our next speaker is due to come in at 1 o'clock, and I'm conscious that it's 12:30. So if there's nothing further, are we able to break, or we don't know?
I guess that just if there was any comments on, I think you've sort of indicated you feel like the communities do have quite good access to elected members, but if there was any other thoughts on that, even if you just contact us when you're a bit pressed for time, we'd be very interested in your thoughts.
And even on the number of councillors and the ward structure and stuff like that, it's also valuable to get your feedback on that too.
And what I can't remember was last time or the time before, we got challenged with a proposal to cut down to 5 councillors that we had to deal with.
We had quite a really broad discussion last time about having some councillors at large as well, rather than all in wards.
I think the main thing is this time around there's actually an opportunity to enhance. I think it was quite a substantial change last time, and the opportunity to enhance the processes further, I think is one that could be taken on board. Like doing the things like the drop-in sessions prior to community board meetings in each of your communities of interest. Those types of things could actually come into play. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned is when you change the boundaries, the whole reserves piece changes, and some people might not be aware of that. So making sure that if you're just understanding that if you change a boundary, we're changing the reserve pot in each of those places too.
Covering off those so we don't end up with any as a result of it.
It was very, very strongly pushed that the CDAs retained their reserves. Last time, I've just gone back and had a look at some of those from 2018, and that was one thing that came through that those patches became very much ring-fenced and protected, even though they did become part of a community board.
No time frame put on them. There was a time frame put on those reserves, I think, wasn't there?
I think 2 years.
Yeah.
I'll reconvene the meeting so that I can close the meeting with the closing karakia, and I'll take off for that. So kia horo, te marino, me whakapapa whanamu, te moana, hei huria, mā tātou, e te rangi nei, aroa atu, aroa ha mai, tātou I tātou katoa, hui tai
Okay.
Thanks everybody, and we can break for lunch and back there at 1 o'clock. So,